All right. Welcome to another episode of Luke Reacts. This one perhaps could be titled Luke Rages. Now, it it takes a, a lot to get me really angry, but I am so angry that I'm fasting. I know that kind of nullifies, at least according to Jesus, the effect of fasting because you're not supposed to talk about fasting. That's what Jesus says. But two things. One is I'm a terrible, terrible faster. I don't do it. I don't like to do it. I I resist it. I have these friends who like will fast for like 40 days. Not me. No. I I don't fast. But there's this verse, this passage actually in the New Testament, book of Mark, where there's a demon possessed boy who's deaf and mute and keeps throwing himself in the fire and stuff. And the disciples, can't get rid of the demon. And Jesus comes in and he's like, calls out the demon and the demon flees, whatever. And the disciples are like, dude, what, why didn't it work for us? And Jesus says, oh, these ones only come out with prayer and fasting. And so what I'm fasting for is to exorcise the demon out of Candace Owens because she has co-opted the message of Charlie Kirk for her own personal gain and to divide the movement, the Charlie Kirk movement. We are on the cusp of the next great awakening in the United States, and Candace is over here maligning Charlie's name by making this big deal about this event in the Hamptons. She posted yesterday, and this is kind of perhaps where it all gets going for me. I mean, first of all, it was like this post on this whole thing was this event in the Hamptons. Bill Ackman paid for Charlie to come, and like a bunch of influencers, and it was a big like come to Jesus on Israel thing. Well, I was there, and it wasn't that. So I'll talk about that more in a second. But I want to talk about her message. She said, "Sorry guys, you murdered my friend. You unlocked Ego Montoya in me. I am not stopping until we get to the bottom of this thing. You murdered? You who? Who, Candace? Oh, the Jews. Oh, it was the Jews who murdered. Okay. Wow. Way to go. Not the guy who literally, we got text messages like his, of his you know, conversation with his boyfriend. No, none of that. Not the guy who actually pulled the trigger. Not the guy who, helped. Not all the people on Discord who knew about it and didn't say anything. Uh, None of them. It was the Jews and Israel. It is so dumb to me. It is so infuriating to me. I yesterday I was gonna do this talk yesterday, but there's another verse, and I like to listen to the verses in the Bible, or at least try to. And this one was like, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to be angry. And so I'm like, okay, I will not record my talk today or yesterday, I guess it was, because I want to make sure that I'm being slow to speak. So here it is. I've let this rest for 24 hours, and it didn't get any better. The rage is still bubbling within me, mostly because, like I said, I just find it so disheartening to see people caught up in listening to this witch go against the message that Charlie wanted to end his life with. A couple months ago, he was asked, how do you want to be remembered? I wanted to be remembered for the courage of my faith in Jesus. Like that was the message he gave over and over. I mean, some people have been talking about how that tent that Charlie would sit at and ask questions, it started with him and just, hey, come ask questions. And it grew and it grew. And it's almost like a tent revival. The dude was preaching Jesus all the time. And there's this great opportunity out there for people who self-identify as Christians to be like, hey, Charlie prioritized his life of God, family, and nation and country. That was the order of his priorities. And maybe you should do the same. And like my church was full on Sunday. There was on Sunday at my church, it was perhaps, I think, unplanned but amazingly timed. Was the pastor got up and he talked about having met Charlie at this event for pastors, a TPUSA event for pastors, and that Charlie was fiery. He was like, "Oh, that's really strong, Charlie." And the pastor who invited him came up to him afterward and was like, "Yeah, man, Charlie's a fiery guy. What, you think he was too strong?" And my pastor said, he told this other pastor, "No, he's got a prophetic message. He's got a prophetic message for America." And they killed the prophets in the Bible because the culture hated the message of the prophets. And that was the message at my church. And then they had the three pastors that lead kind of the youth ministry. One was the kids ministry, the other the youth ministry, and the third the young adult ministry. And each of them gave messages. And then they had all the elders go to the front of the church, and they had the kids walk past them, and the elders laid hands on all the people, all the kids. And that lasted for over 30 minutes of kids and people, students walking past the elders and getting prayed for. And the church was full. I mean, full. And I believe it's because of Charlie's message resonated with a lot of people. I mean, so many threads of mine that I'm seeing people buying Bibles for the first time, going to church. They had not gone to church in a long time. They grew up in the church, but they had left, and they're going back for the first time in a decade or years, and that kind of thing. Something hit, guys. And we're going to let this witch drag his name through the mud to make it about Israel and the Jews because of her obsession with Israel and the Jews. I'm not. And so the Bible says that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in heavenly places. And I'm seeing this right now, real time. We are battling like an enemy that is seeking to distract from the moment that this could be. And people like Candace Owens, and I will add Tucker Carlson to that mix, because both of them are claiming Christianity. Both of them claim to be Christians. Candace is claiming to be a Catholic. She says, "Oh, Charlie was just about to convert. He was praying the rosary." I don't know whether he was or not. I doubt it. But his wife was very committed Catholic. But you know who's not a committed Catholic? I guarantee it. Her, Candace. Okay. It was like I know people who were with her when she went to Israel back in the day when she had the opportunity to go. And in the day that that the tour went down and got the tour of the old city, that's where you go to the Western Wall and you go to the Via Dolorosa, the way of Christ crucifixion, go to the Church of Holy Sepulchre, go to the upper room, that kind of time. What'd she do? Shopping at the mall that's just outside the Jaffa Gate, Mamila. She was there shopping at Zara, or maybe it was American Eagle, or Castro, whatever store she was looking for. Okay, this is not narcissists don't submit. they don't submit well. And one of the things that, when you're in a hierarchical church, submission is part of the deal. Like her obsession with the Jews was not his obsession. Okay. Like, here's the reality is that there's a lot of people out there, particularly on the influencer circuit. And at this event in the Hamptons, there was probably, if you add up all the people who were there, probably 100 million followers on social media. And these guys are so tired, guys and girls. There's about 20 of them, are so tired of talking about Israel or being asked to talk about Israel or being expected to talk about Israel one way or another. They're just over it. They don't want to do it. They avoid it. And yet it comes at them. And they're expected to say something, or people want them to say something. And if they don't say the thing that everybody wants them to say, then they get attacked. And so they're just not that into it. And I get that. There was a long time in my life when, like, if you would ask me in like 2009, hey, Luke, what do you think about Israel and the Jews? I'd be like, I don't know, nothing. Like, and if you had expected me to like make some case, I don't know if I would, what case I would have made. And I think a lot of people are in that. Okay. So Megyn Kelly comes out yesterday and says, oh, she got so much flack for just having a little bit of criticism of Israel. Yeah. And like, what flack? People called you up and said, hey, like, I wanted to, tell you how things really are, or I want to make my case to you. We're friends. We got, I have your personal cell. We can talk about this. Like, Israel is one of those issues that is very, very difficult for people to handle well. It's a lot. It crosses. It's one of those issues that tends to cross in lines that are not always obvious, right? So the pro-life issue is pretty much like a pro-life, pro-choice. That's the line, and it tends to be most conservatives. Now, not all, obviously, but most are pro-life, and then the other, the other side is pro-choice or pro-abortion. Okay, and that line's kind of obvious. There are lines though, like Israel's one of those where it can divide conservatives. And this happens particularly in the church. I remember when I lived in DC, I went to church at the same church that we were the Philos Project, and I went to church a few times as we were being formed and getting started with the guy who ran the Telos group, which was the kind of let's say like the alternative Philos, right? So if you wanted to go learn about how to become pro-Palestinian, you went on a Telos trip. If you wanted to become pro-Israel, you come on a Philos trip, both Greek. But like, we went to the same church, me and this guy from Telos, and he helped facilitate the Eucharist communion. And so we would like, I'd get the blessing from him, because it's like the Israel issue crossed lines that are not, that are different than other times. But that's not, the kind of like, I get phone calls when I say the wrong thing is not the same as what Candace is doing and what Tucker it keeps leaning into. What they are doing is everything is somehow about Jews in Israel. Like the murder of Charlie, as far as we can tell, had nothing to do with Israel. And I doubt we'll find it. I mean, why, according to the text messages that came out yesterday, they said, he was asked, like, why did you do it? And the murderer says that there's some forms of hate that cannot be negotiated. Okay. I had enough of the hate. Some hate can't be negotiated. And he waited, it seems. He waited until the question came out about trans. And his partner, his gay lover was a trans dude who was trying to become a woman or pretending to be a woman. That's the they. It's not the Jews. It's not Israel. But that's not way it plays out with Candace. This event in the Hamptons, there was the first talk was about what does it mean to be American? And that talk was about immigration, about where the line is, about what should be the appropriate policy. How do we talk about this? But the whole point that Charlie brought that group together was because he realized he needed to create disciples, little Charlies, who would be able to go on the campuses and do what he did. And it was a way to test and see whether there were people who could take up the mantle and join him. So it's not just, there's not a lot of people out there that can sit, and answer questions on so many topics like Charlie could. But he also prepped for it. The last prep meeting he had was with my friend Josh Hammer and Rabbi Pesach Willicke, and they were prepping for the questions on Israel and talking about how best to answer them. And that is, that's public. There was an article in New York Post about that. Josh has talked about that. So Charlie is the first hour and a half discussion, 2-hour discussion was over what does it mean to be American? Because there's a bunch of people out there that are toying the line on, becoming racist a bit on the right. And that's a problem. And Charlie sees that as a problem. That doesn't win us anybody. But we have a problem with illegal immigration. So how do we frame this? How do we talk about this? That was the start. Then we had dinner. Then we, had some more conversations. There was a Q&A about, home ownership, the economy. There was the discussion on Israel was about 2 hours. There were, of the 20 people in the room, of the 20 influencers specifically, I would say that 10 were pro-Israel, 5 were indifferent, and 5 were antagonistic. I'd probably break it down like that. And there was a great discussion and it did start with, what if I texted that, I think Bibi should resign? What would happen? And we talked about the consequences of that decision and the where's the line on that? What should be, what are the consequences for saying stuff these days? And that got people going. And it was a rousing discussion. But it didn't actually, say it paled in comparison to the heat of the discussion about marriage. The discussion about marriage was way more hot, I think, than the discussion about Israel, because Charlie was pretty clear that you should marry young and have children. And there was a bunch of people in that room that didn't want to do that. They're totally happy playing the field about, they don't want to get married. They just want to screw around. I mean, it wasn't like there were Christians there, but it wasn't a Christian group. Um, and so it's pretty clear to me that, like, anybody talking about the Hampton event, like, their singular focus is on Israel, and it wasn't. It was on the big issues facing Gen Z and how do we talk about it. But Charlie wanted to build the people he could send around to do what he did on campuses. Because how do you build somebody up? How do you train for that? It takes a lot of work, and Charlie was working on that, and that was the vision that he was looking for. And because he knows he has a movement, he knows he has there's a lot of expectations on him, and it was a really robust discussion all around. But to think that there was like some nefarious purpose behind it, listen, Charlie was not a fan of Bibi Netanyahu. He wasn't. Uh, but Charlie's support for Israel wasn't all bound up in who the current leader of Israel is. Like mine isn't. I don't have an issue with Bibi. When Bennett was prime minister for 5 seconds, I didn't like suddenly stop supporting Israel. Like the prime minister of Israel does not determine whether I support Israel or not. The Bible does. And for Charlie, the Bible does. For Candace, it is it's the opposite. Like here's the thing. If you read in Romans 11, Romans 11 is one of those passages where there's a lot of conversation about it, like the future of Israel and the Jewish people, right? And Romans 11, I mean, it's really 9, 10, and 11 talk about this, but it's 11 where Paul is explicitly talking to Gentiles, which is me. I'm a Gentile, I'm not Jewish. It's Candace, it's Tucker, it's Megan. I think, I like, it's most of the people in the world, not Jewish. Okay. Now, it's in that section of Romans 11, and Paul is explicitly talking to the Gentiles, and he repeatedly tells the Gentiles to not be boastful about what they've been given, about the fact that they have been given entrance into participating in God's plan. Don't be arrogant. Don't be boastful. Don't be proud. Those are the things that Paul says over and over and over again. You know who's boastful and proud about the supposed grace that she's been given? Candace. Arrogant. And to turn that arrogance into hate and to see everything nefarious in the entire world as somehow connected to Israel and Jews is unbecoming of a Christian. And I'm going to say this to all of you who are following her and all of you who are trafficking in the same garbage as that. Even if you do not believe that God has anything left special for Israel and the Jewish people, if you're one of those who think that all the promises of God to Israel has been transferred to the church, but all the curses still stay with the Jews. It's not only is it dumb, but it's wrong. Parentheses. But if you're of that kind that thinks that the church replaces Israel and God's done with them as any special purpose, that the covenant's done, the old covenant is old, and the new is new, and the old is done away with. If you're of that kind, you are not allowed to be boastful about it or arrogant about it. Paul explicitly says, the root sustains you. You don't sustain the root. Some idiots out there think that that root being talked about there is Jesus. It's not. It's the Old Testament. It's Israel. It's the story. Like the story's there, and it baffles me how guys like Joel Webbin, who's a pastor, and other pastors across, Isaac Iskar, Andrew Iskar, and pastors I see all the time through my threads. They're so arrogant and boastful. They're a poor witness. If you believe replacement theology, but then turn that into hatred of the Jewish people in Israel, you do not know the promise of Jesus Christ for the world. I guarantee you. Here's what I suspect. I suspect that those churches, those people that traffic in like not just the supersession, the anti-Israel supersessionism, the replacement theology stuff, that is, because lots of Christians, lots of pastors believe replacement theology, fulfillment theology, covenant theology, whatever you want to call it. It's the same stuff. Okay. Basically, the promises has been transferred to the church, and Israel as a special project of God is done. What's their mission budget? You're sending people out into the world to preach the gospel? Or are they just kind of, is it just the sitting in the pews, frozen chosen? God's going to pick who's God's going to pick. I guarantee, I haven't done any research on it, but I guarantee that those churches, Joel Webbin's church, I'd be like, if he spends $10, he spends a morning coffee on evangelism outside of his stupid group, I'd be surprised. I'd be really surprised. I mean, maybe one of his followers will prove me wrong and say, no, he's really committed to evangelism. What, of white people? Because all these guys come off, they're just full of hate. Full of hate. And here's the thing. One other thing about these guys, they all grew up in Pentecostal churches. They all grew up in like dispensational churches. What's a big tell for me? Somebody who's just raging against Israel. They probably grew up in a dispensational, a very pro-Israel home. Probably had a single parent who was a little weird, struggling. They didn't have a lot of money, and they were just, and so they're reacting. Half the problem of the antisemitism would go away with some good therapy about daddy issues or mommy issues. It is infuriating to me. And this is why I'm so hot right now on this, is because in this moment, when our attention could be focused on the Great Awakening, the fact that millions of kids loved Charlie Kirk and saw something profound in his message, who wanted to do what Charlie did, who are grieving and are turning to Jesus to find some kind of consolation. And these idiots, these, yeah, I'll leave that word right there, are using this moment to sow division. That to me is how I know that there's demonic oppression in this. Because the enemy hates what Charlie is they hate it. And Charlie is transforming this world. He was a martyr. And I expect better of Christians. I expect better of Christian leaders. And I will do everything within my power. About awakening Diego Montoya, Candace. You've awakened one. The thing is, I know a lot of people. This is not a threat. I'm not threatening anything. I'm not threatening. No doxing is going to happen from me. But I will pray and I will fast and I will gather millions of people around the world. You know, like last year, in 2024, there was a prayer for Israel that lasted 21 days of 100 million people around the world praying for Israel. I'm going to get that group going again. Not only are we going to pray for Israel, we're going to pray for revival in America, and we're going to pray that the demons that control you and all of your friends will be silenced. What you're doing, Candace, is small. Because what you're doing is coming against the God of the universe, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because I'm praying for your repentance. I'm calling you to turn from your wicked ways. This is evil what you're doing. It is evil. I think that's enough for me.